Hi, my name is Alicia and I'm one half of the team behind the gardening game GOLEMBERT. Today I wanted to talk about how I work with our isometric game perspective, especially what my workflow is when creating new objects, plans and animations, and a few thoughts behind our decisions we made for our game relating to our perspective, layering of game objects and the vertical layout of our game world. This topic was requested by viewers of our devlogs. Thank you so much for the people who have requested such a specific topic for a video. It really helps to know what you are interested in, and of course it makes working on videos a lot more fun when I know that it helps you in some way. So if our game sounds fun to you, or if you want to support us in any way, please consider wishlisting GOLEMBERT on Steam. The link is as always in the description box, and let's start this video now. For our game, a top-down-esque perspective made sense. We don't use 3D and therefore can't use a freely moving camera, so the camera had to remain static. We planned our perspective to be inspired by games like Harvest Moon or Stardew Valley. Those games don't have a full top-down perspective because you see the sides of objects and characters. People would also say oblique to this perspective. We wanted the same feeling, but with a bit more depth, which is what isometry is perfect for. The special thing about isometry is that there is no realistic perspective in it, so objects don't get smaller towards the back. This is great for games that need to provide a great overview of the environment, such as Roller Coaster Tycoon or The Sims. Mobile games also often use the perspective as it allows a lot more details without things getting in each other's way. Since we didn't want to make life too easy for ourselves, GOLEMBERT is in an isometric view, but most of the environments are still viewed from the front. That's why objects like raised beds are typically isometric, but for the rest you wouldn't see it 100% at first glance, like you would in games where you have this typical, you see the environment completely from one edge of the room kind of thing. This sometimes makes it difficult to merge multiple objects with the environment, which should usually be a strength of this isometric view. So if you use the isometric perspective for your game, we advise you to do everything in perspective as it saves you a lot of hassle, but we found our approach suitable for our game specifically, so this is why we decided to do it this way. So how do I work when I need to create new objects or environments for GOLEMBERT? I like to draw the first design ideas for all objects on paper. In this case, I have to guess the perspective a bit freely. This is why it doesn't look the same as in the final game, which means that designs have to be adjusted a lot. For me, analog thinking is just much easier and brings out more creative ideas, and afterwards I have to adapt the objects digitally. When I digitize the designs, my way of working is that I underlay the environment with 50% opacity when drawing objects, especially to adjust the corners and edges of environments and objects to each other. This is not a 100% clean way to do it. In Procreate, for example, there are guidelines that you can switch on when drawing, which would allow a cleaner result. The advantage of the way I do it is that it's not quite right and therefore has a hand-painted look. This perfect isometric view sometimes has something very sterile about it, even if the drawings themselves are really pretty. The downside is that it doesn't quite fit. Sometimes the lines aren't exactly straight and it can feel unclean to look at. Most of the time, however, all objects are close enough in perspective that it hasn't caused any problems so far. I then used the same process when animating. Since the characters are isometric, I had to animate GOLEMBERTs and the Herbert's walk animations in all directions. Again, I created sketches with the environment in the background. However, the perfect perspective is not as important for figures as it is for objects. I think the same applies also to plants. With organic things, small mistakes are less noticeable than with static material things. So if one side of a raised bed is crooked, it is more noticeable than if a plant is not angled enough, for example. Overall, I would advise you to use guidelines. Almost everyone does it. It's not cheating, but a normal process in isometric drawing, and if you want that freehand look like we do, then draw your environment with isometric guides, and everything else after that you can align directly with the environment. This is how we do it. The comment also asked about our layering. In our case, the entire environment has been drawn together. So for example, there is no extra floor texture. The floor and the stairs are on the same drawing or sprite. Objects that move or can be placed, for example GOLEMBERT or pods, have a script that changed their layer depending on their y-axis position. If GOLEMBERT is at 0, 0 and a pod is at 0, -1, GOLEMBERT would appear behind the pod, for example. If GOLEMBERT is at 0, -2, he would appear in front of it. The environment details that should always be in front of GOLEMBERT are saved separately and are placed on their own layers. In games like Stardew Valley, there is an invisible grid with which you can place objects and plants. The great thing about it is that not only does everything look uniform, but there are no objects or plants that are high and close enough to obscure the view of an object behind them. We don't have this kind of grid in our game. We wanted to allow the greatest possible freedom in placement. Or rather, we have this kind of grid as an option, but it's something the player has to manually switch on if they want a really clean garden layout. This free placement of objects and plants means that things can cross each other visually, but it hasn't really happened enough to make any problems while playing. The last thing the commenter asked was about our verticality. I assume that this refers to how we have designed the environment so that the view is not impaired. How much freedom you have here depends on the game. For example, city building games or management and strategy games, such as Roller Coaster Tycoon again, offer the player the opportunity to place buildings themselves. Some of them are very high and obscure the view behind them. One way to deal with this, which these games also often offer, is to see the same map from other points. So it's still the same isometric view, but from 4 different points. But what you tend to do in games like ours, where you place smaller objects but large structures are already given, is to have a sort of wall at the top of the map. You can, for example, see it here in Stardew Valley. There is actually nothing behind the house. Everything you place on the entire farm, every small object or plant, is in front of the house area. Since we have most areas of our map in one scene, we have divided our environment into different frames. What I call frames is just an area of the game that can be seen completely by one screen. So the main gardening area, for example, only needs 1 frame, and then the harbor area also only needs 1 frame. Stairs are only in-betweens for the frames that the whole island design was based around. As the person who commented has already seen correctly, the island layout is vertical, so in our case the intermediate area is slightly higher so that Zuzu's ship doesn't obscure the view. The garden area is a little higher so that the tree and the rocks don't affect the view, and the second gardening area is higher so that Helios and GOLEMBERT's house don't obstruct the view. So you could use something similar to our verticality in your game, but you could also do the same thing in width with the hypothetical wall in the background, or like Stardew Valley and similar games simply have multiple scenes, so everything doesn't have to fit seamlessly together like it does with our game. But thinking about things like verticality, it's a really cool design trick in itself, kind of reminiscent of stage dressing. Especially if you have a static camera, you have to find a clever solution for something like that. I hope that with this video and explaining our thoughts and processes, I could maybe help you a little, or at least show you a new perspective, pun intended. Thank you very much for watching this video, and we will see each other next time. Goodbye.